Jake Gordon, welcome to the Development by David podcast. How are you?
Thank you, David. I'm doing really well, man. How are you?
I am really good. I can't believe this is the first time we've met. Properly met, like had a conversation.
I'm excited. I've been a fan of the show for a while now, so I'm really excited to be here. So I'm really grateful for you to have me on, and I'm excited to get into it.
And this is your first podcast, right?
This is my first podcast, so it feels a bit of a celebrity moment, man, because I've been listening to podcasts, and podcasts have been a massive source of inspiration and knowledge for a good few years now. So it feels kind of bizarre to be on one, but I'm really excited to be here.
If I were to ask you the bog standard Development by David question, who is Jake Gordon today in 2023? How would you describe yourself?
Jake Gordon in 2023 is someone who is committed to service of others, to help others, to share knowledge, to share expertise, to share my story and the hope that it can maybe be of service to others, because the people before me have shared their stories and shared their wisdom and shared their knowledge. And have passed it down to me, so I feel a bit of a duty to kind of pass that forward to the next load of people. So Jake Gordon 2023 is someone who is committed to service, growth, and learning.
How does that manifest itself?
I think it manifests in what I'm doing with breathwork at the moment. It manifests in how I interact daily with people. It manifests in how I treat myself and how I treat my time and what my hobbies are and where I kind of align my energy towards.
You come across as this very spiritual, enlightened individual, but I know that's not been the case for all of your life. I know of your kind of humble beginnings, not to use that cliched term, but can we take it back to young Jake Gordon? What was life like in your surroundings like when you were younger?
Yeah, man. So young Jake Gordon was a big stoner, basically. Someone I grew up in the East End of Glasgow. I grew up in like quite a turbulent environment, like in high school and stuff like that. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking. And at the time, you just kind of accept it for what it was. But it's not when you speak to other people and start to tell your story, and you're like, "Oh, you started drinking at 14." Like, wow, that's a bit mad. That's a bit mad, you know. So yeah, going through high school and stuff like that was definitely a turbulent time, and I kind of just wanted to fit in basically with a lot of people. I had a very wandering mind. I would always be daydreaming of adventures and different tales and places far, far away, you know. So I've always had a bit of a wandering mind, and that wandering mind led on to kind of getting into parties and just like drinking and drugs and just like having a kind of party-esque kind of lifestyle, really. And then until one day that all kind of finally caught up on me, and I just had a bit of a kind of breakdown of body and of mind. And I had to change my situation, and I had to kind of hit reset, I would say, and move away basically.
What was that kind of pivotal event that caused you and spurred you to go on and change your life for the better?
I think the pivotal event was I was basically working in a job, and it was something I really enjoyed, but I was just really stressed out, really burned out. And at the time, I had a girlfriend, and things were getting kind of serious. She was thinking about moving to Glasgow, and it felt like my life was just going to take another turn. Like I was stepping more further into adulthood. And just to rewind a little bit, when I was younger, I had an experience where I lived in China for 3 years. And that was actually like a really pivotal moment for me as well, because that kind of opened my mind up to all these different cultures and experiences and stuff like that. I was pretty young at the time, but it still, when I came back, it still had an ingrained sort of part of me. And I've always been really like interested in Asian culture and the way that they are communities and how they treat people. And when everything started to get a bit more serious, when everything started to like level up a little bit, I was like, I just said like, I have to go. I need to leave. I need to see what's outside of this little bubble, because I'd spent so long daydreaming out the window, seeing what was outside of Glasgow, what was outside of Scotland. And I remember it very vividly. I was sitting on the top of Calton Hill in Edinburgh with my girlfriend, and she was talking about moving to Glasgow, and I just burst into tears basically. And I was just like, look, like, I need to go, like, I need to leave. Like, I always struggled with this feeling of like belonging. Like, I always struggled with feeling that I belonged in that community and where I grew up and stuff. And I always felt that I was like different to everybody. And that feeling really stayed with me for my whole life, really. And I just had to take a chance to try and find somewhere that I belonged or something that I belonged to, because I think that's a fundamental need for every human being, So that was the pivotal moment, and then that kind of set a chain of events through after that.
Before we touch on those chain of events, I guess being in China for 3 years, going somewhere completely inordinate from where you grew up, knowing what could be on the other side, and then coming back to the East End of Glasgow, I can imagine you could do like a litmus test and think, if I stay where I am now, I can look around me and see where I end up. I have now been to China and I've experienced all these different cultures and different paths, and it probably gave you a heightened curiosity to go and pave your own way and take that leap. But perhaps if you didn't have those 3 years being wanderlust and seeing what was outside of the parapet, then perhaps you might have never had that curiosity to make that change.
Yeah, I do think about that a lot actually. But even though I was like quite a young child, like I was maybe like from like, I think it was maybe from like 5 till about 7, I had like friends in America, I had all these different cultures, and that was definitely a big catalyst of growth. And also like my family and my upbringing, like I saw my mum kind of do a job that she hated for like 20, 25 years, and she'd always come back in just really sad and really depressed, and I'd see that every day. I grew up with a single mum, so I'd see that every day, and that also really reinforced in me that I have to find something else. There is more to this than just the same repeated cycle of going to work, coming home, making dinner, having a drink, da 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 da. So those two aspects, going to China and seeing my mum and what she had to do in order to put food on the table, really drove me to find and look for change and look for something outside of what I grew up in.
You've told me privately that you have got ADHD. When did you find out that you had that?
So I was maybe about like 21 years old, and I remember it very vividly. I was just sitting on the couch one night, kind of flicking through the channels, and this BBC documentary came on, and I think it was a comedian called Rory Bremer. I'm not sure if you're familiar. And he was basically doing this documentary to kind of like, he'd always suspected he had ADHD, and he always suspected something was different, and he kind of went on this documentary to kind of find out. And I remember sitting there, and I remember just feeling like I was being spoken to, like directly through the screen in a way that I'd never really experienced. Um, and I was just like, I was just absolutely gobsmacked, basically. I was absolutely gobsmacked. And I kind of spoke to my mum, and she was like, "Oh, I don't think you've got ADHD. You were never really hyperactive, or you were really a great little kid and all that." But the more I kind of digged into it and the more I kind of researched it, the more everything started to make sense. Um, and I kind of went to the doctor and I told her, and she was and I kind of just basically laid it all out in front of her, and she was like, okay, so we sent me away to see like a mental health specialist. And I remember also just walking in and just like verbal diarrhea on this poor doctor for like 35 minutes. And she goes, I think you might have ADHD, basically. And it's not really a foolproof way of like diagnosing someone. You basically get this little sheet, and it's like a list of situations, and you rank 1 to 5, and whatever score you get, you've got ADHD, basically. But that was a big moment in my sort of development as well, because going back to what I'd said earlier about not feeling like I'd fitted in, I always knew I was different. Like I always knew I was different. The way that I thought, the way that I acted, and that just really it just made that sense, and it just gave me this like deep sense of like relief, that like all these, I don't like to call them symptoms, but I like to call them behaviors. All these behaviors that I would show, that there was a kind of reasoning for that, and that um it wasn't my fault really, because I used to be quite, I'm learning to not be, but I'm quite hard on myself. And because of all these sort of negative behaviors that connotate with ADHD, I used to beat myself up a lot about them. But I'm on a journey now of trying to love myself a little bit more and be a bit softer with myself.
Jake, I love that. And the reason I asked that question, and I'm so glad that you shared your journey so transparently and authentically, is because I've just been recently diagnosed as having ADHD. And similar to you, you start to excuse and give yourself compassion for all those behaviors or symptoms that you've had over the last 20, for me, it was 24 years until I got a diagnosis. Things like losing my keys all the time, or turning up late to events, or what else am I bad at? Like getting engrossed in tasks, or being totally distracted from tasks so easily. And I don't know about you, but for so many years I thought I was wrong. I thought I was a bad person. I thought I was not intelligent. I thought I was clumsy. But in retrospect, it was just these behaviors coming out in me. Um, I want to ask you, given that you were also in your 20s when you were diagnosed, it's it's quite a hard thing to receive, because you've lived 20 plus years not knowing that you've had it. How did you
Mm.
explain that to yourself? How did you give yourself the compassion to have that realization? Because I can guess it can really alter how you know yourself when you discover so
Mm.
late on. And I guess people from a lower socioeconomic background, like the East End of Glasgow, or where I'm from, it is typically underdiagnosed in young kids from a lower socioeconomic background, because the schools don't test for it. Parents can't pick up on the symptoms in the same way. So I'm just curious to know how you gave yourself that news.
Mm. How did I give myself the news? I think I really relied on YouTube. I relied on researching and sort of listening to other people's stories. Like the beauty of the internet is there is a lot of like anecdotal like information of people who are sharing their stories around ADHD, and that made me feel really like seen, and it made me feel really um welcomed, and that like these sort of behaviors that I just don't have them, that other people do have them. And through that, I started to learn more strategies and tools and techniques, and also sitting in reflection, and sitting in meditation has really helped to bring self-compassion to myself, and around the whole subject of ADHD. But it's a work in progress, man. It's not something that can be fixed overnight. I think what I've came to learn is that it's a constant working on. It's something that needs to be always having awareness of, if that makes sense.
Besides breath work, which I can imagine is a technique that you've used to kind of manage it, what
Mhm.
techniques have you used to manage your ADHD?
Um, Breathwork's the number one for me, but also techniques like journaling that really helps me. Like I try and do morning notes, so just simply allowing my mind just to write whatever comes out onto the paper, and that kind of really empties my brain, and it it's kind of crystallizes my thought as well. So it's like it's not longer this like ethereal thing that's just bouncing around my head. Like it's actually real, and it almost takes the thought out of my head and onto the paper. Movement and exercise has been a huge one. It's something that I've been really kind of inconsistent with for a long time, but over the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been really consistent with it, and I feel that that's been a big help for me. Those are probably my top three ones. I would say breathwork, meditation, journaling, and some kind of movement exercise.
I completely resonate with that. I agree. When I go a run, I went to run this morning. So many thoughts just bubbled up to the surface as I was running, and I could deal with them and action them and almost be mindful with them and talk to them as I was running. But
Mm.
if I was just going about my everyday as I normally do, they would just be playing post-it note rain and wouldn't be categorized and organized and actioned and acknowledged. But when I go this run, I seem to have this clarity of thought where what wants to bubble up to the top does. And yeah, I love those three, the big three for managing your ADHD.
Can I ask, like, what was your light bulb moment?
My
In
light
terms
bulb
of,
moment.
in terms of if I, like, sort of becoming aware that, like, something might not be 100 right, or, like, yeah, what made you go down that rabbit hole of figuring out your ADHD?
There had always been those behaviors. I was always ambiently aware of those behaviors. And I guess over time, the punishment that I gave myself for having those behaviors amounted to a point where I was really not liking myself because I wrapped so many negative connotations around my identity because of those behaviors. And it just took, for me, I just wanted to understand, uh, is this just me? Am I just built like this? And I realized it was when it was taking a toll on my work. I was put on a project management role whereby I was managing numerous milestones and deadlines and numerous work streams and had people to report to at different dates. And you know what it's like having ADHD. You can't manage so many variables at one time. Um, you're best, like I'm best to be sat down with one direct task, not multiple things at one time. So I was just my work started to kind of underperform in that sense, and I again my identity was tied to my work. 'Cause I pride myself in being a performer and a high achiever. So then I just thought, let me check this out. So I just went through the occupational health route at work, and they referred me to a kind of third party company called Genius Within. I don't know if the public can use this company, but they're really great in terms of diagnostics. And yeah, I just went down that route and did very similar questions to you and got the report back and the neurological assessment. And now, similar to you, it allows me to explain loads of my previous behaviors. And I can use that now in work to give me a hall pass to not do project management and to do delivery or to do public speaking or to do something that suits my what do they call it? Spiky graph or something. I can't remember the phrase, but it's basically a kind of graph that shows you what you're great at and what you're not so great at.
Mm,
But yeah, for me, it was just I got so fed up of tying my identity to these poor, quote unquote, poor behaviors, to the point I
mm.
really wanted to check out whether it was me or something that was underlying. And thankfully, I can now give myself the compassion for having ADHD.
How did that make you feel getting that sort of official diagnosis? Because I've had a few conversations with some people recently, and they've been thinking that they maybe got ADHD, but they don't know if they should go down the whole official diagnosis. So, be curious to know how that official diagnosis made you feel.
I think the diagnosis is only useful if you know how to use it properly. I know some people that, and I'm not talking about ADHD, and they're very open about this, whereby they've been diagnosed with something, and they've never been diagnosed before, but they always had the underlying symptoms. But now they excuse other behaviors with that
Mm,
that diagnostic. Um, so I think I need to be careful not to proactively try and manage some of these behaviors by saying, "That's fine. I don't need to change them because I've got ADHD. I don't need to show up on time to places because I've got ADHD because I can use that as a hall pass now." So I think the first thing that I recognized to myself was not to become not to consume the label too much and not to identify as a label too much. Because realistically, just getting that diagnosis, I haven't changed. I didn't change overnight once getting that through the post. I'm still the same person I was for the last 24 years. So I just made sure I continued operating like that. And actually, another good piece of advice that I got was to think about what that enables. Like, if you're neurodiverse, it means you're different,
Mhm,
and it means you're extraordinary.
mhm,
Extraordinary people get extraordinary results. So I had to learn what parts of ADHD were complementary, and that could
mhm,
be how, like, my attention to detail or how engrossed I can get in a task when I enjoy it and when I'm stimulated. So I just started to really inquire about the positives of being neurodiverse, and
mhm.
yeah, try to do my best to capitalize on them.
Yeah, I love that point about neurodiversity is an extraordinary sort of capacity within you, and that we should harness that and not look at the negative side of things, but simply become aware of them. Go, okay, I have these behaviors and I do these things, so I'm going to become aware of them, so that when they kind of automatically happen, I can begin to like catch myself and sort of rectify them. Whilst also realizing that you've got all these extraordinary talents that you can focus and channel your energy into.
Totally right. I want to ask. We spoke about the Carlton Hill moment where you burst into tears and realized
Mm,
there was more to life than your current existence, and then a
mhm.
preceding episode of events occurred. What happened next after that, Jake? If we go back to that part of the story.
So yeah, what happened after that? Basically, I was a self-employed videographer and photographer, and for the past sort of 2 years, I'd been grinding my ass off, basically trying to make this business work. And I was just actually at the cusp of kind of shifting to get it full time, completely by myself, and I just basically brought that tower of blocks down, so to speak, and just decided that it wasn't for me anymore. And at the time, I was working a job, and a friend had told me that she'd spent some time in Australia, and that it was really easy, basically, to get a visa. Um, and you could get this working holiday visa, and you could go for up to 2 years. And she was raving about it constantly, and I had really no kind of previous knowledge about Australia, and I was just like, "Cool, man, that sounds good." Like, so I bought the visa, I bought the flights. Um, my ex, who I was with at the time, we had already sort of decided to go traveling together. So we sort of came to this arrangement that we were going to travel together for 3 months in Southeast Asia, and then I was going to leave and she was going to go back home. Um, so sort of fast forward 6 months after Colton Hill, I'd quit my job, quit the business, sort of sold everything, basically had a backpack and gotten a one way ticket to Thailand. And me and my ex just went for it, basically, and we just had an amazing time traveling Southeast Asia in 3 months. Um, and then the day came when she had to leave, and that also was just a big, like, oh, this is really happening now. I'm about to go to the other side of the world where I don't know anyone at all, and I'm going to be completely alone. Um, and yeah, that was a big growth moment for sure.
Describe your first day alone. How did that feel?
Uh, it was terrible because we'd just been traveling in Southeast Asia, and it was shorts and t-shirt weather, and I got to Australia in the middle of their winter. So I got to Sydney, and I was like, fuck, man, like it's freezing cold and like it's raining. And I was like, what the hell? Like I thought Australia was meant to be like sunshine and like babes, but it was horrible. It was so grey and just it was absolutely, yeah, minging, basically. And yeah, it was just a lot of wandering around the streets kind of aimlessly, basically, of Sydney, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I basically saw this opportunity to go to a sort of yoga retreat center and to work there and like volunteer there. And I'd kind of dabbled a little bit in meditation and yoga before I came, and I'd really found the benefit of it, but the sort of roots of my old life kept bringing me back, you know. So I couldn't really get the consistency. So I headed off there, and that was a really life changing experience as well.
So you gave yourself the permission to just totally embody and immerse yourself into meditation and breath work. Whereas, I guess if you did this back home, you would still have the one mate at the weekend that wanted to go to the pub, or the person on social media that would lambast you for it. But when you were away, dragged and dropped into the middle of nowhere in a new land, you could properly reinvent yourself and give yourself the permission to pursue
Mhm.
meditation and mindfulness as a kind of full time hobby or passion.
Yeah, and it was more so the environment really. So what the place that I went to could be referred to as like an ashram, which is basically the sort of Vedic sort of Indian version of like a monastery. So men sleep in one place and women sleep in another place. And it's a very sort of regimented schedule of like you'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, there would be a yoga class that you could attend. And then from 7 o'clock till about 1 p.m., you did your service. So your service could be either working in the kitchen, it could be cleaning the beds, being in this of how do you say it, like sort of grounds department. And once you've finished your service, you had the day to do whatever you wanted. Basically, there would be free meditation classes that you could attend. There'd be lots of yoga classes that you could attend. There would be philosophy classes that you could attend. And the people that lived there were all similar to me, really. They were seekers, you know, people that were looking for something different, something new. And that was the first time that I felt like I truly belonged in that community. And I just felt like so at home and so at peace. And it was this beautiful sort of grounds that was centered in the middle of a forest. And it was people from all over the world. And it was just really a magical time.
And is this where your full breathwork journey began?
Yeah, so this is kind of where I started to have the time and the space to really start to practice consistently, and also have the influence of other people who had been practicing for many years, who had seen these incredible benefits, and also being in that environment where that was sort of praised and encouraged. So I just began to double down on that really, and I doubled down on breathwork and meditation, and that place was like a time portal, man. You know, like within a blink of an eye, 3 months had passed, and I just felt completely and utterly different. I like to think of it as well, like there's almost levels to our being and to our existence, and a lot of people are quite happy on residing on this kind of surface level of, oh, it's okay, we'll just keep going, like I'm sad, but we just need to keep going, we need to keep going. And I felt like I'd unlocked this new level of being, you know. And also, it was important to mention at that time, I'd stopped smoking cigarettes, I'd stopped drinking, I'd stopped doing any recreational drugs, I'd stopped doing any coffee, and I just cleansed my whole body and my whole mind. And I was just like, I'm not going to go back to the way that I'd felt before. And breath work was at the core of that. Also at the core of that was community. It was having these amazing conversations. It was reading philosophy. It was movement. It was nature. The whole all these different aspects together just created this whole echo chamber of just of change, and that place was just the catalyst for everything.
Of course, my next question is, when you came back to Scotland, how could you integrate that lifestyle, that community, the nature, everything that made your life complete? How could you integrate and plug and play that back into your life when you moved back to Scotland? 'Cause I can imagine that was pretty difficult to maintain.
It was probably one of the most difficult things ever, because basically COVID had happened and I'd had to clip my wings had been clipped literally, and things started to get a bit more complicated in Australia. So I decided to come back, And I came back into the middle of the pandemic. I came back to my mum's place, the place that I'd been trying to escape for like all my life. And it was so, so difficult. But the one thing that stayed with me was everything that I learned and all the practices that I'd sort of harnessed at that time. One of them being breath work, and that really held me up when emotionally and physically I could have just crumbled and kind of went down into a dark rabbit hole of depression. Those things that I learned and that wisdom that I gained really was like a backboard for me in order to kind of slowly get myself to back to Scotland and back to not normalcy and back to normal life really.
Jake, what a journey that you have been on, and I'm really glad that we could use that to frame up my next question, because I think we're teasing the listener of what breath work is, because some people might have just
Mhm.
seen this title and think, breath work, like your breath. Surely your breath isn't anything to regulate or manage or enhance or
Mhm.
to weaponize or to use as a tool. Can you explain what breath work is?
Yeah, so it's the most common question I get when I tell people what I do is, it's just breathing, right? And in a sense, yeah, it is breathing, but breath work is learning to regulate and change and control our breath in order to change our physiological state. So our breath is the key to our autonomic nervous system. It's the only thing that happens in our body that we can actually control. And when we start to control that, we can start to influence other parts of our autonomic nervous system, such as our heart rate, our emotions, our blood pressure. So that would probably be the best way to describe it is using our breath to change how we feel, how we think. Yeah.
And how does that differ from other traditional forms of meditation or relaxing techniques?
The best way to think about it, I would say, is that breathwork is a very active style of meditation. You are changing the pattern and the rhythm of your breath in order to influence a certain state of being. Whereas when we traditionally meditate, and it's more of a passive kind of experience. We observe the thoughts as they enter. Um, it's more just allowing everything to happen. Whereas breathwork is a very physical, visceral kind of experience where we're actually changing how our breath starts, you know?
How does breathing through the nose and breathing through the mouth differ, and where should we be breathing and when?
So our nose is the only organ in our body that's actually meant to is actually created for us to breathe through. The nose has so much function in order to breathe in, whereas the mouth has no function really at all. And breathing through your mouth is actually like can be very detrimental to your health, most mentally and physically. And that's what I kind of found out because when I was growing up and stuff, I had a lot of problems such as like rhinitis. I would always have like a blocked nose. The wandering mind as well, too. And what I came to sort of realize is when I was younger, I had a lot of braces. I had braces from a very early age, and that those braces had kind of propelled my mouth to be open constantly. And when you breathe in and out through your mouth, you actually begin to lose function of your nose. So your nose starts to clog up. So the nose is almost like a use it or lose it kind of organ. The less that we breathe through it, the more constricted and the more dilated the vessels are going to become. So a lot of people struggle to breathe in and out through their nose, and it's maybe because they're breathing in and out through their mouth. And a lot of people actually breathe in and out through their mouth at different points in the day, but aren't actually aware of it. And that could be the core of a lot of people's sort of problems is mouth breathing.
Mate, I think you've just diagnosed me. I had rhinitis as well, and I had to go through rhinoplasty. I had really bad sinus problems. I ended up getting surgery, and perhaps that was
Wow.
the whole entire reason.
What was that like getting the surgery and stuff?
Liberating, absolutely liberating,
Mm,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't breathe through my nose for many years.
Mhm, mhm,
I remember going into the office with tissues all the time because my nose was always running similar to yours.
mhm.
And it was in fact Gordon Belch, who's been on the
Yeah.
podcast, mutual friend. He said, "Well, David,
Mhm.
you're not taking cocaine, are you?" Because that's like a common symptom of people who are kind of
Mhm.
using that, and I'm like, "No, no, mate, I've just got really bad sinuses." Um,
Mhm.
so when they cut open my nose and I could breathe after the recovery of the surgery, it was like a new life. I could smell again. I could run effortlessly. I could sleep so much better. It was incredible.
Yeah, that was the same exact same as me, man. I remember being in Australia and just the 3 months or so had passed, and I was like, "I can breathe in and out through my nose, like, is the pollen in Australia different?" Or, like, I just couldn't understand kinda why this was, and when I got back again, everything had cleared, and my mum was like, "Wow, that's amazing," like, and one book, if I can recommend one book for the listeners if they're interested in this topic, is the James Nestor book, Breath: The New Science of a Lost Art. When I read that book, it basically it made all the things that I'd experienced through breathwork, it made sense, you know? It basically it really just fully explained everything. So if people have got sort of breathing queries, that book was a big game changer for me.
In the industry of breathwork, how well is Wim Hof? How well is he perceived as his persona and techniques? Are they valid?
Oh, 100%. Like what Wim Hof has done is basically put breathwork on the map. Like I remember he was my kind of gateway to it. And I remember doing it for the first time and just feeling like this out of body sort of ecstasy experience. And it was absolutely incredible. And I think what he's doing in order to try and get the message about breathwork is really incredible. But the really interesting thing about breathwork is like what Wim shows is just one side of the coin. There is multiple sides to this coin, and there is a lot of different sort of aspects to breathwork. Not only is there the really fast and intense kind of people are crying and flailing their arms around kind of breathwork, but there is also the kind of breathwork that helps us to shift our body into a state of relaxation, a state of calm, and it's also about educating people about breathing in and out through your nose. I know it sounds really trivial and really simple, but you'd be really surprised how much people don't know about the functions of our own breath when it's arguably the most important thing that happens in our bodies. Because without our breath, we'd be dead, and it's our quality of breath dictates the quality of our life, and we've experienced that individually. Like our quality of breath was so poor because of our nose being blocked, and that had a detrimental impact on our life.
The quality of our breath dictates the quality of our life. I love that. That's incredible. I'm sure I read or listened to James Nestor in a podcast, or maybe I read a quote from him, but apparently like 80% of our energy is from our breath.
Yep, 80% of our energy comes from our breath. It flushes out toxins. It can regulate our heart rate. It can lower our blood pressure. It helps a lot with our cognitive abilities too. It's a hidden superpower really that everybody has, and when we can start to learn how to optimize it, we can really become more in control of our day to day experience.
And the funny thing is, most people look for the next nootropic or the next vitamin or the next pill or the next shake or the next fad diet to follow that they pay for. But in fact, breath work is typically it's free. You don't have to pay for that superpower.
Exactly. It's free. It's literally is the most accessible tool that we have to manage our physical, mental, and emotional health. It's really is it's the crux of everything. It's the bridge towards getting a deeper understanding of our emotions and a deeper understanding of ourselves. I've seen some incredible like transformations, incredible releases, incredible experiences of people, even and just doing this in like a really short period of time, and the feedback and the sort of what I see in other people is just driving me further and further to get this information and hold space for people to have these experiences.
How can your breath impact your athletic and physical performance?
So that's a really interesting perspective as well. And basically, so we're all aware that we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out CO2. So CO2 isn't actually a waste gas. CO2 is fundamental in improving our athletic performance. When we are running and we're gassed, it's because our body is sensitive to the CO2, which means CO2 is our perception to breathe. So when CO2 rises too much in the body, that's when we get gassed and that's when we start to um, struggle. But what we can do through certain breathwork techniques like breath holding is we can start to train our CO2 tolerance in order to become less sensitive to it, which will allow us to go further, and it will allow us to get gassed less as well. And again, that's really a simple techniques that anyone can take control of and use in their day to day experience.
And on the contrary, or not the contrary, but complementary, how can breath work help with stress, anxiety, depression, and overall well-being like that?
Mhm. That's probably one of the most like passionate parts of breathwork that I'm really interested in, because I do think we live in like a stress and anxiety fueled society. And when we slow down our breath, a lot of people are over breathing, which means they're releasing too much CO2. And when we release too much CO2, the gas exchange between CO2 and oxygen can't happen as efficiently, which means less blood flow to the brain. It can sort of exacerbate these feelings of anxiety and stress, because when you think about when you're stressed or anxious, your breathing patterns really shallow, But when we take a moment to pause and take a moment to slow down our breath, we can start to shift our body into a parasympathetic state of awareness. And that can really help these feelings of stress and anxiety.
Wow. And I've heard or seen, and I might be a fad, but I've seen how the way you breathe impacts your facial structure as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. So basically, if we're breathing through our mouth, gravity will start to bring down our jaw, and it will start to sort of impact our facial structure. You can kind of see it in me a little bit, because in my facial structure is quite elongated, and it sort of, yeah, it brings the whole facial structure down. And there's a theory as well that because we've sort of evolved now to eat less sort of dense foods, our jaws aren't as trained as well. So we're eating more vegetables and not eating like as much meat as we used to, etc., etc. And that's also had an impact on our facial structures as well. You can know once you become aware of that, you can start to see it like in other people too, um, because the tongue needs to be put on the top of the mouth in order to keep the jaw closed, because if I relax my jaw, it will just remain open. So I've trained my jaw now to sort of bring it down to so it's closed, if that makes sense.
I've seen pictures and videos and TikToks of people. I think it's called like the mewing technique. I might be wrong, where
Yep,
they
that's it.
deliberately put their tongue to the top of their mouth, so it gives them this really defined
Mhm,
model type
mhm,
look. And
mhm,
aside practice on the mirror, I looked to the side and put my tongue to the roof of my mouth, and you could see my double chin at the time
mhm,
elevating and leaving.
mhm.
Um, so I'm going to blame my poor breath work for the fact that I've got a fat round face. Jake, hope you don't mind.
No, but that's where it should be. The tongue should rest right on the top of the mouth, because then it starts to bring the bottom jaw forward, and it almost like acts as like a natural lock, um, and it just brings everything nice and close together. So it should be the tongue should be at the top of the mouth, but I think with the mewing technique, I might be wrong, but they encourage to hold it with like tension, but you can just do it quite naturally, and it doesn't have that same kind of really hard feeling in the face.
Can breath work be dangerous for someone? Like any other practice, like if you take vitamins or you take, some people can have an allergic reaction to certain other
Mhm.
biohacking techniques. But what about breathwork? Can it be bad for someone?
100%, yeah, because people with stress, anxiety, people who have suffered trauma, and people who have gone through some difficult things in their life, there is an element of breath work called transformational style breath work, similar to Wim Hof, where you you huff and you puff and you induce these feelings of sort of ecstasy with inside you. For someone that's gone through some serious trauma, that is not the way that they should be breathing, because when they go into that state, that might bring back that feeling of trauma, and they might like exacerbate those issues. Some people who
I,
have hypertension. Sorry.
I was saying I watched this video of this really muscly lad in an F45 gym, and it must have been a breathwork session that was going on, and he was screaming, literally, this big muscular 200-pound guy, 250-pound guy, just screaming his heart out after doing breathwork. And I thought it was just a clickbait viral video, and then I looked in the comments, and everyone was giving him sympathy because they had experienced something similar before, and it blew my mind the power of breath. It really, really did.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen also similar similar things like that happen. I've seen people process trauma that they've been holding on to for like 20, 25 years. Um, I've seen, yeah, grown men who have never cried before and fits of tears. It's incredible. It's incredible, but it has to be approached with caution. It has to be approached with caution, because when you get into this transformational style of breath work, it is not suitable for everyone. Not everyone can or should be moved into that state of their nervous system. A lot of people need to go on the other side and go slower and calmer in order to sort of soothe their nervous system, because if they've experienced trauma or experienced some really tough things in their life, their nervous system already might be on edge. And when you breathe in that sort of Wim Hof esque kind of style of way, it might exacerbate the underlying issue.
Oh, wow. That's stark, mate. And I know you're not a scientist per background, but surely this stuff is not just a fad. Surely it can be scientifically proven and backed.
Yeah, 100%. As the science is catching up, like books like the science and the James Nestor book. There's an organization called Oxygen Advantage who are committed to sharing science-backed protocols, and they do a lot of research. They do a lot of academic papers. Um, yeah, but the thing that I always say to people is like with breath work is like experiencing it is believing it. Like I could sit and talk about this all day long, but you won't really understand until you experience it.
Can we do a live immersive experience for the listener?
Yeah, man, I was going to suggest that, so I'm glad you brought that up.
What's the shortest time period that we could give this to the listener in? Could we do like a quick espresso breath, something like that?
We
Something
could do
quick?
a quick espresso breath, man. We could do 2-3 minutes.
Let's go for it. Walk me through it.
2-3 minutes.
I'm
So,
your,
just a little caveat just before we begin: if you're driving or operating any heavy machinery, this would not be suitable for you to do right now. But if you're just listening in a safe and quiet environment, I'll invite you now just to find a chair, and in that chair, just sitting upright. And then when you feel you're ready, you can just begin to close down the eyes. And you just start to feel the weight of the body against the chair. And what we're going to do is something really simple and really easy. And we're going to do some cyclical sighing. So I'm just going to explain this, and I would like you just to continue to listen to my voice. We're going to be taking deep, slow inhales through the nose, and we're going to be sighing through the mouth. There's not going to be a pause or a stop, just one after the other. So with me, take a big deep inhale through the nose and sigh. And again, deep inhale and sigh. And again, deep inhale and sigh. Keep going, deep inhale and sigh. Keep going. Deep inhale and sigh. Just go at your own pace here. Inhale after exhale. With each inhale, you feel the body expand, and with each exhale, you feel the body soften. Breathing in through the nose. Letting go through the mouth. Keep breathing. Just a couple more breaths. Coming up for your last inhale, breathing all the way in. And then sighing and holding the breath here now at the bottom. So breathing all the way out, and we hold for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deep inhale through the nose. Squeeze, create an upward pressure towards the head as we hold for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let it all go. And just take a moment now just to become aware of what's happening inside the body. Maybe you start to feel that your heart rate's elevated. Maybe you start to feel the blood flowing through the body. Just take a moment just to soak in this feeling. Now with that, we're going to take one last sigh. So deep inhale. And then when you're ready, you can just slowly begin to open the eyes. That was a really short espresso breath. Cyclical sighing is a really powerful way to offshoot any stress. Sighing is an automatic response that happens in the body, but when we can actually start to take control of that. So when we sigh, it's because our body's telling us it needs to let go of something. But when we start to reverse that and start to take control, we can let go of things at our own will rather than waiting for our body to automatically release that.
So you're telling me the sigh is not just your way to signal to someone else that you're fed up with them. It's actually a physiological response.
It's a physiological response, man, and I am determined to make people sigh more and for it not to be this sort of sign of like rudeness or sign of I'm annoyed at you, you know. Like actually like use it, you know. It's a gift that we can just like it feels amazing as well, you know, like it feels good to sigh, like like it's there for us to use.
Mate, you're going to regret telling me this. I'm going to go into work and sigh at everybody and just say, my breathwork tutor, Jake, he told me to do this. It's not a
Spread it
reflection of
amongst the
you.
office, man. Spread it amongst the office. You know, if anybody's stressed out, just take a sigh, man. Just take a sigh.
Not after lunch, after we've had some tuna or garlic, though. We don't want that happening.
No, that would be nasty. That would be nasty.
But mate, honestly, I feel instantly better for that. And I think it's like watching your content and listening to people like James Nestor and Wim Hof. I really want to embody it and embed it into my daily routine. How can someone start incorporating breathwork into their self-care routine?
Just start small. So just start a couple minutes whenever you feel some emotions rising, or instead of scrolling off your phone, just again closing the eyes. You can even keep the eyes open and just taking some nice, soft, gentle breaths in and out through the nose, and actually becoming aware of each breath. It's the awareness of the breath that can really have incredible benefits throughout our life, because when we become aware of the breath, we start to become aware of our thoughts, we start to become aware of our emotions. So simply just starting with awareness. And the interesting thing about awareness is you might be mouth breathing and you might not realize it. But when you just start with simply becoming aware of the breath, then you can start to rectify and change these breathing habits that might have been ingrained in the body for a long time. So starting small and starting with awareness is the best way to make breathwork a part of your daily experience.
If you've totally sold someone on the benefits of breath work and they want to start, what resources do you think are the best places to look to kind of start their journey? Besides, obviously, your stuff, Insight Timer, I'll link all that stuff below. But besides your stuff specifically, where else can people look for some beginners resources?
So for some beginners resources, I really recommend my teacher, a man called Michael Berker, who runs an organization called Yoga Lap. And he is about educating people on breath work and these ancient techniques. The interesting thing about breath work is that it's been done for thousands of years. It's been done by these ancient cultures in India and in these Buddhist cultures. And everything that you see today with Wim Hof and all these modern styles of breathwork is just a twist on an ancient classic. So he does a really great job of educating people of the sort of background of breathwork. So I really recommend him. I also recommend the Oxygen Advantage. So for anybody who's having any troubles with their breathing, e.g., rhinitis or asthma or anything that me and David have talked about, the Oxygen Advantage is about functional breathing. So learning about the science of breath, and it's about retraining the brain to breathe in a more efficient way. If you start with those two, that will give you a really well-rounded view of breath work.
Awesome, mate. Can I ask another question that I'm curious about? What is the
Please.
yawn? What's the yawn and what's that responsible for?
Do you mean just like of generally yawning?
Yeah, just generally, because that's a kind of exhalation of air, isn't it?
Yeah, again, that's just another way that the body's releasing stress. It's another way of the body automatically releasing stress is through yawning. And once you start to get into breath work, you can actually start to trigger the yawn, and you can actually start to take control of the yawn, similar to you taking control of the sigh. And again, it's just another way for the body to release stress, release feelings of tension, because our body takes in all the tension. And when we yawn or when we sigh, that's our body just, letting it's built up too much for our body. So if you're yawning and sighing a lot, then that can actually be an issue, that something is wrong with your breathing. So if you've been sighing or yawning a lot, then that is an issue that you might be actually over breathing. So it might be worth checking in on that.
I want to end up in a really random question that you definitely didn't expect me to ask. How did David Blaine hold his breath for 17 minutes? Is that true? Did he actually do that, or is
Mm.
it like a stage prank? Do you think, or is that physically possible? Can you train your breath to do something like that?
You can train your breath. You can train your breath to hold your breath for a long time. Whether it was 17 minutes or not, I'm not sure. But there is a lot of breathing techniques that free divers use as well. And again, it's going back to really slowing down the breath, because you can get to a point where you can be taking like one inhale like a minute, and just really slowing everything right down. You can hold your breath for a long period of time once you start to slow everything back down. Because when we talked about earlier, the CO2 is our main stimulus to breathe. When we train our body to be less sensitive to that, that will increase our breath hold time. So what David Blaine has done is he's trained his CO2 tolerance in order to get to those breath hold times. And you kind of see it as well in the new Avatar movie. I don't know if you've seen the new Avatar movie, but it's all based about underwater and stuff like that. And there's a scene where they go through a breathwork practice in order to sort of increase the new people to the sea's breath hold time. So it's been used in free diving as well.
Jake, mate, I've loved this conversation. It's just a realm that's so undiscovered on the podcast. It's still so undiscovered just in the wider domain. And I'm really glad that you've taken the time to use your own story, your own insight, your own knowledge to just demystify the whole landscape and just come at it with such a vulnerable style and then share your story. If the listeners want to embark on their journey and they want to do it specifically with you because they've loved your story, how can people get in touch with you, mate?
They can just get in touch with me. Instagram is one of the most popular platforms, and that's just the Everyday Breath. And when you go into my Instagram account, you'll see a bunch of resources and information that can help you sort of develop a breathwork practice. So reach out to me on Instagram at the Everyday Breath.
Jake, this has been so much fun. Thanks for coming on this Friday night.
Thank you, David. Really grateful for you. And it's been amazing. So thank you.